Welcome to another episode of the Prove Me Wrong podcast. I am your host, Pete Lieb. I have what I think is a very interesting show tonight, and I'm really happy to bring it to you. My guest tonight is Mr. Rusty McClure, and we are going to talk about the mysterious Coral Castle, which is located in Homestead, Florida, and Ed Leedskalnin, the man who built it. And the topic is interesting to me because it speaks to our perception of human capabilities. What are we capable of, either individually or as a group? And this is a major talking point when we discuss these massive ancient structures like the pyramids, the Moai figures on Easter Island, Stonehenge. It always comes back to how. How were the primitive people able to construct these structures without the benefit of heavy machinery that we utilize now? What techniques were used by these people, and how did we lose those capabilities over time as we have become, quote unquote, more advanced with building techniques? So again, to fill us in on the history behind the Coral Castle, I am fortunate to have Rusty McClure with us tonight. Rusty is an advisor and venture capitalist to numerous entrepreneurial projects, and he's also a New York Times bestseller of 3 books, Crosley, Cincinnatus, and The Coral Castle, The Mystery of Ed Leedskalnin and His American Stonehenge, which is what we're going to cover tonight. You can find more information about Rusty on his website, rustymcclurebooks.com, on amazon.com, or on coralcastlebook.com. Welcome, Rusty, to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start at the beginning, if you don't mind. Your background, as I described it earlier, seems kind of wide and varied. So what's the story behind your interest in the Coral Castle, and how did you find yourself in southern Florida interested enough to research and author the book?
Well, my wife is from Miami. We were going to visit we visited our in-laws on the way to the islands, the Bahamian Islands, where we were going to go for a vacation, a Christmas vacation. And Hurricane Andrew had landfall in Homestead, Florida, and wiped out where we were going and wiped out a whole bunch of South Florida. And I found little pamphlets like you do when you walk into a restaurant. There's little pamphlets all over Florida. You live in Florida, you know what I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
And I grabbed about 7 or 8 of them and sat down at a breakfast with my in-laws, my family, and started reading them, and one of them talked about Coral Castle. So from that point, I was intrigued.
So were you able to visit right then, or when was the first time you were able to visit?
I could not visit it because Homestead was totally torn up, with one exception, which was the castle. So nobody except the National Guard was allowed to visit Homestead, Florida. And as it turned out, the only thing that survived during that period of time, including Homestead Air Force Base, was the castle. And it took me 15 years before I could ever get back to seeing it.
Oh, wow. So you saw the pamphlet, and then 15 years later was when you actually got to see it. And
yes, I read about it from time to time. Then the internet came along, and I would see snippets of it on the internet, and it kind of laid in my head as something that I wanted to think about. And so one day I got to visit it. I was actually so built up in my head that I thought I was going to be disappointed. And I'll begin this and probably end with the same comment. It didn't disappoint me at all. It wasn't cheesy. It was not a roadside souvenir remnant from the 30s, 40s that Florida had so many of.
Right.
It was the real deal. The walls are 3 and 4 feet thick. They're 8 and 10 feet high. They're 14 and 20 feet long. It is a real castle made out of oolite limestone, which is what we call coral rock.
So when I look at the pictures, and I think most people, when they look at the pictures of the place, all they really see are kind of the courtyard area, the garden, as it were. Is there really a castle structure, living quarters that associated with that as well?
Yes, there's for the most part there's 4 walls that I just described, and then there is a 2-story living. I don't know let's call it a keep, a castle keep.
Okay.
I mean it is very, very medieval looking. It is thick walled stone. It has a 16-step stairway leading up to the second floor. It is cooled because of this heavy rock. Keeps it cool. The 16 steps are carved out of one huge piece of oolite limestone. You and I would sit down and we'd kind of build, we'd carve little blocks and build it that way. This guy built, and this is the huge part of the story. He built it all out of one massive piece of rock. I'm talking about the stairway,
right?
And then these slabs are 2 stories in the air with a roof, and they are massive and super heavy. We're talking about tons, not pounds.
Yeah, and I think anybody who sees the pictures of it, it's impressive when you look at it. But what makes it impressive, the castle itself is impressive. What makes the story so interesting is about Ed. It's Ed's story. Ed Leedskalnin, and this single man, one man, who, to your point just now, built a staircase from one piece of stone, 16 steps, built the walls, built all these obelisks that are in the courtyard area, carved everything out of it by himself. And for those who don't know the story, largely at night, didn't tell anybody what he was doing. Who is Ed Leedskalnin? Can you kind of fill me in on that?
Yes. Ed's born in Riga, Latvia, 1887. His grandfather was a stonemason. He learns to be a stonemason. He's the youngest of 5 boys. He gets to the 4th grade and starts carving, the best we know, grave markers all the way up to helping some of the remnants of the lords and ladies of the day repair and build pieces of their castles, Eastern Europe, turn of the 1900th century. Gets himself into his mid-late 20s, unmarried, falls in love with a young girl. She's still in her teens. And on the day that they're supposed to be married, she decides he's weird and decides that he's not marriage material, and she says no at the altar. Ed, heartbroken and embarrassed, bolts. He heads for Hamburg, Germany, gets on a ship like so many Eastern Europeans did at that time, Europeans for that matter, and sails to the Statue of Liberty and goes through Ellis Island. We know all this because of the records. We tracked the actual ship. We have a picture in our book of the actual ship because we found the paperwork. We found the paperwork through Ellis Island. He goes with 2 other people from Latvia to New Jersey, and then spends about a decade or so in the logging camps of Northwest America, Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia.
Wow.
Now, he's 5 feet tall, weighs about 100 pounds, and because he's a Latvian citizen, he goes back and forth across the Canadian border and tells the people and does the paperwork that he's 5'4", 5'3".
Right.
He lies about his height, so we know he's not real happy that he's only about 5 foot something, like 5 foot 1/2 inch. And during that time, he contracts probably tuberculosis, some form of a upper respiratory disease, and probably gets told, we don't know for sure, that he needs, like so many people in those days before antibiotics, that he has to go south, get out of the colder, damp Pacific Northwest where he's doing logging work, and finds his way all the way to Florida. Homestead Florida has 800 people. The next thing we really know about Ed is that a guy picks him up on the side of the road, Homestead Florida citizen, thinks he's lying on the side of the road in the ditch, and one of the citizens of Homestead picks him up, puts him in his car, takes him not to the hospital because Homestead only has 800 people, and takes him to the doctor's office, the only doctor. The doctor diagnoses him stage 4 tuberculosis and says Ed will be dead in 6 months.
Wow.
The good citizen of Homestead takes Ed home where his wife and he clean out a tool shed and make it a hospice-style bedroom, 1923, for Ed to die in. The doctor continues to visit him, and a year and a half later, Ed says, I'm now cured. The doctor says, how did you live? And Ed said to the doctor and to the couple, I used the powers of magnetricity to cure myself.
So
Ed takes $10 and buys 10 acres of land on the outskirts of Homestead, Florida City, actually, and buys 10 acres of land where he will then begin to mine, take the topsoil off and mine the oolite limestone.
So before he ever started anything, he was stage 4 tuberculosis. Before he started with 1 stone, he was given 6 months to live, and somehow or another cures himself. I mean, that alone.
He says he used the powers of magnetricity. They remembered that. And let's just pause here for a minute.
Sure.
And you know the Easter Island heads, right? The Great Easter Island heads.
Yes.
Stonehenge, the pyramids, all the things you were talking about, and we could name 15 to 30 more across the world. You correctly labeled them ancient. They are the ancients.
Right.
This guy lived in the time we accumulated the information for the book. There were people who knew Ed and people who knew people who knew Ed. I mean, this is a modern story of one of these megalithic rock assemblies that is unlike all the rest of them because the rest of them are ancient.
So he never...
And this is a modern day story. You could get in your car right now and drive to Homestead, Florida. You could.
Absolutely.
Our host here, because you live in Florida, and you could be there, and there are people still who remember Ed. Barely, but there's still people in nursing homes that remembered Ed particularly when we put the book together.
I can even do one better than that. I actually live off of US 1. For those who don't know the state, US 1 goes north to south from the tip of Florida where I'm at up near St. Augustine all the way down. So I could go out of my house, take a left, go south for about 7 hours, and I would run right into the Coral Castle.
Yes, you would. Yes, you would. It's very real, and Ed was very real, and Ed was modern, and still, we'll get to this. No one knows how he built it.
Yeah, so that was my first question. Is he says to me that's kind of a vague answer. I used magnetricity to cure my tuberculosis. So that alone would to me beg a whole lot more questions. If I was the doctor, how did you do this? Well, I used magnetricity. What does that mean, Ed? Did you somehow electrify yourself? What was the process there? So that alone is confusing and astounding. It's astounding, first of all, that he survived before he did anything else. Then you say, from what I heard, you're telling me he bought 10 acres of land, or $10, 10 acres, and then...
No, $1 an acre. $10 for all 10 acres.
Wow. And then he mined the coral from the ground himself. That's how he got it. He milled it to himself from the ground.
Underneath Florida, underneath the Everglades, are probably miles of oolite limestone. And so what he does is he digs down not very far through the topsoil, and there it is. It's there for him. And then, so he mines it right there on those 10 acres. And then he lifts these 5, 10, sometimes 30, 40 ton pieces of rock up in the air. He works at night, he works alone, and he never lets anybody see him doing it.
Yeah, so finding the stone under the ground is the easy part. To your point, he then cuts the stones out of the ground and somehow lifts them from where they were sitting, and then erects them, and then carves them. Or I don't know how he did it. If he carved them first, then erected them, I'm not sure. But the point is, he found the rock in the ground, carved blocks of it, huge, thousands and thousands of pounds, and then somehow lifted it out by himself. So,
yeah.
And again, so he's never mentioned how that happened. And if I'm reading the story correctly, he moved it, right? It wasn't where it's sitting now is not the original location.
No, we'll get to that, but
okay.
I want to interject here,
sure,
because I don't want it to be too far away from the magnetricity story. So, yes, he built this castle, and people know him. He grows vegetables and trades vegetables for kerosene at the gas station. He's well known and well liked. He goes to the movie theaters and in the movie theater, I should say, in Homestead.
Right.
And it is silent movies, and it has the words underneath, and it helps him teach himself better English and how to read. And the people know he's there, and they know who he is. And they come and they pay a quarter, and they take a tour, and they ask him how he built the castle. And he gave two answers. He says, I discovered and learned the secrets of how the Egyptians built the pyramids. And the second answer he gave him was, I used the powers of magnetricity. The same thing he told the doctor that he used to cure himself from tuberculosis. Okay? So no one is allowed to watch him. They know he's doing it. It's out in the middle of a very remote area. It's actually called Florida City, which is it's a little nothing next to Homestead at that time. And it's very remote. Nobody can see him from there. So they go out and they sometimes sneak up on him at night, and he has these little spy holes, and he stops working. There's plenty of stories about one woman took her kids out and parked her car, and he stopped working, and finally he waved to her and said, I'm not going to work until you leave. And that was like 2 or 3 in the morning. He gets the idea, we're not exactly sure why, to move the whole castle halfway through his time in Florida City and Homestead. So now it's in Homestead, and Homestead's built up around it.
Mm-hmm.
So he actually then moves it to Homestead. He hires a local guy who owns a truck. They uninflate the tires, and the guy who owns the truck has to leave the truck, and Ed loads these giant pieces on the truck, and then he calls him and lets him come and use the truck. And right down the middle of Homestead, Florida, these pieces of the castle that he's already built get moved. They see it in the middle of the street on this truck. And one day, the story is that the truck driver was in a hurry, and Ed told him to go around the other side of the house or whatever that was also on the property. And he called for him and told him, come around. He was ready. and all those big pieces had been moved onto the truck. Now, that truck driver died, but his sister said he never, ever, he was like 32 years old when he was helping Ed move with his truck. And he said he never recanted that story, that he just walked around this other side of the house. Ed told him to just wait over there. And in a few moments, Ed said, all right, you can come back. And the big pieces were on the truck. I said he had no idea how he did it. There's all kinds of lore about that. There's all kinds of different stories. And I'll be happy to share any of the ones you want to, you can pull them out of me, or I can just ramble on.
How far along was he when he moved? I mean, was it completely finished when he moved, and he moved the whole thing?
It wasn't.
How far along?
The way I understand it, and nobody has pictures of this, it was mostly the castle. That's a good segue. It was mostly the walls of the castle, but the things that he ultimately put in the castle came later.
Okay.
Now, there is a 42-foot high obelisk in the middle of the castle, and it weighs just about 40 tons. And it is taller and heavier than any obelisk in Stonehenge. Okay? It's bigger, heavier, and taller than any of the obelisks in Stonehenge. I've been to Stonehenge. And it took tribes of druids 2 or 3 centuries to drag Stonehenge into place. This guy did it in 15 years by himself, 5 feet tall, 100 pounds. So there's all kinds of things inside the castle we can talk about.
So did he finished the castle, right? I mean, he finished it, and that's kind of how he made a living. Was he charged people money to come and see it? But that was his only means of making a living. 25
cents. He grew his own vegetables. He had a few animals that he slaughtered. He traded vegetables for the things he needed. The biggest thing he needed was kerosene for his cooking. So he built a lot of things that he needed out of the stuff he found in the junkyard. There was a big junkyard at the end of one of the roads in Homestead. Remember, there's an Air Force base there as well.
Mm-hmm.
And he would go to the junkyard and get junk, and he would turn it into pots and pans and cooking ovens and all kinds of things like that. And he was pretty self-sufficient, up to the point that he traded vegetables and charged, like you said, admission to the castle. A lot of people think that he wanted the castle to be on South 60 Highway because he would get more people going back and forth to the Keys, and he would have more traffic. That probably is true. There's another interesting theory. You know what a ley line is?
Yes.
LEH?
Yes.
All right. Maybe your listeners need to be reminded of what it is. There's actually a Sir Ley, LEH, named after, and what Ley, an English scientist, figured out was there are a lot of henges. Stonehenges just happens to be one. They're all over Europe and parts of the rest of the world. And what Ley figured out was they're all lined up on latitude and longitudinal lines, and has something they think to do with the magnetic line of the North Pole. The people who follow these ley lines say that the ley lines also are what creates the Bermuda Triangle. There's three lines to a triangle. Those are also ley lines. And when he moved the castle, the vortex of one of the 3 triangle points of the Bermuda Triangle is the front door of Coral Castle.
No way.
Now, did Ed know that? There's no evidence that he knew it. Is that what motivated him to move it? No evidence of that. But did he move it because he wanted to be off South 60? He never told people why he moved. Lots of things he would tell them a little bit. And that's what makes Coral Castle and Ed so fascinating, is that most of what he did and why he did it is a mystery.
And just how he obtained the knowledge, because you said that he had a third or fourth grade education. So it's not like he had traveled the world studying, abroad, studying different scrolls of knowledge to determine magnetricity or how to do these things. Somehow or another, he found that out. I mean, it's just
he taught himself. He taught himself to read and write English. He came to the United States fluent in Russian and German. I mean, we're talking about a guy with a fourth grade education.
Right.
On Saturday, or other days, I guess, too, he would get on a bus and ride to Miami, downtown Miami, and go to the library and check out physics and pamphlets, popular science type stuff, and take it back to his castle and study it. I met a docent at the castle who remembered when he was a young kid being at the Miami Library, the downtown Miami Library. Miami wasn't that big. And he remembered Ed in a black suit with a black tie and white shirt having a meltdown in the library because the librarian was trying to explain to him that he couldn't take out the reference book. You know how every library has reference books. You can't take them out. He wanted to take out these physics reference books. He said, I was a little kid, and it took me a long time to put two and two together. That was Ed, and he was having a temper tantrum in the library because he wanted to take these reference books back probably to the castle. And so people knew about Ed going to the library in Miami and studying and bringing back pamphlets. There's actually a picture in our book of a whole bunch of pamphlets and magazines and stuff that he strung up on the outside of that castle, two-story castle home in the corner of the castle that he built, where he obviously was studying and trying to figure out physics, electricity, radio. We can talk about those things if you want.
So was there still evidence that his quarry existed? I mean, is there still on the grounds there? Were he able to point to the places? And I'm just trying to think again of obtaining the limestone, quarrying it out. There has to be some type of remnant of where he took it from. Did he make mistakes? Were there pieces broken?
These are massive slabs.
Right.
And on the ground, there's a whole, I don't know if you want to call it a field, but it's a whole area where you can see he quarried.
Wow.
You know, you can see the indentations in the rock where he cut them. You know, where he cuts these out, and they are not far from the castle until you think that you're going to have to lift them up and take them over there.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's not like some quarry, 50 miles away, and all the architects and the builders know to get it. It's right there, but then there's no equipment. There's nothing to help Ed truck this stuff up, yank it up out of the ground, except Ed and a bunch of rudimentary tools that he fashioned out of the junkyard.
Right. So he's making the tools that he actually cuts the stone. He's making those tools. He's making them out of junk.
It's all right there. Most of it's all still there.
Wow.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right.
You can go visit it. You can actually just walk right there there's no restraining. They'll let you just walk right and see these chunks of missing rock where Ed took that rock, and then you can look right over to the castle where he somehow got it up in the air and moved it over there.
So standing up the obelisks is one thing, but you're also talking about a 2-story living quarters that is made of different stones that are placed, and each one of those stones looks, enormous.
They're not. When you say stones, they are chunks. They are
right.
slab of building material stones.
So
they are not stones that you and I could pick up like a brick. They are. You look at them and go, "There's no way anybody could pick these up."
Well, and that's what I meant is that, if you have an obelisk and you if it's laying there on the ground and you've carved it, that I can see how maybe you could stand it up. If you get it, if you move it into a place, you can get it stood up. But taking those huge blocks, 12 feet up, and then placing it on top of another block, and then doing that, for the whole second story, that almost seems more impressive to me, because somehow you have to lift those stones versus just kind of raising one end and standing it up.
I think, in the interest of time, it'd be a good time to talk about some of the elements,
sure,
which will help you kind of wrap your mind around a little bit about these stones.
Absolutely.
Okay? All right. So I told you about the obelisk, the biggest one, but then there's another obelisk, and Ed, this obelisk is a foot thick, at least. And what's noteworthy about that is he drilled a good-sized round hole in it, about a foot. I'd say this is equally about 35 feet in the air. So it's not an obelisk. You can't just go up and look at it. You have to look it up in the air. And so he has positioned this extraordinarily heavy, let's say 30-ton piece of rock up in the air 35, 40 feet. And he's got a hole in it. Across the hole is a quadrant, basically metal rusted coat hanger, one vertical, one horizontal. You got the picture? So there's four pieces, and it is positioned exactly. Now think about how hard it would be to get something up in the air, and now you want to position it perfectly, because at the other end of the castle, halfway in the middle of the castle, is a notch, and you look through that notch and you look at this quadrant that's 30, 40 feet away from you and 30, 40 feet in the air. And the North Star appears in each of the quadrants, each of the seasons. It's lined up perfectly so that each time the solstice or the season changes, the North Star moves into the next quadrant. The point of all this is, if you miss that by much, if anything, the North Star is not going to be perfectly aligned. This guy not only put it up in the air, he put it up perfectly.
Yeah, he put it up with a purpose. He put it up with a specific idea in mind.
Perfectly. Well said. Well said.
Absolutely.
Now, across from what I just described, this obelisk, he called it the telescope, but it's not really a telescope. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but it's not a real telescope, but it's lined up perfectly with the North Star, so that the North Star moves by the quadrants, by the seasons. I've already explained that. In the middle of one of these big walls is a 5-ton hanging door. And Ed positioned this, so it's one of the slabs of the wall pivots.
Mm-hmm.
And Ed positioned it perfectly so that a young child, 12-year-old kid, 10-year-old kid, could just push this door and it would turn and, be perpendicular, and it would become a door. It was a wall, and then it rotates.
How did he do that? What was it positioned on?
We don't know, but here's what we do know. 25 years after Ed passed away, the door collapsed. By then, it's on the verge of the National Historic Registry.
Mm-hmm.
They call the University of Florida's engineering department, and they say, we got a problem. We got this thing. We don't know how it works. Would you help us? And a couple of students, professor types, come down. It took 5 guys in a great big crane to lift this thing up in the air. And what they find is it's sitting on a Model A Ford axle. And in the hot Florida sun, it rusted. In the rain and the
right.
hurricanes, it is rusted through, and that's why it fell over. But it's pivoting on a Ford axle. They take a look at this thing, and they say the only way a guy could make a 5-ton door work this way would be that he would have to drill, and he drilled a hole right up through the middle of it that is in the perfect geographic weight center of this big slab. And they say the only way you could drill a hole like that and have it that perfectly straight would be to use a laser beam. There are no laser beams. Ed died in the early 1950s. There are no laser beams then.
Yeah.
It is perfect, and that's why it pivots perfectly. Well, they pick it up, they work on it a little bit, and they start thinking about it. They go, you know what a pestle is, right? A pestle?
Yes.
Where you grind wheat in a bowl. They go, if this axle is turning on top of a piece of oolite limestone, it would have ground it into sand. And we can't imagine, since we got it apart, what it's sitting on. So they take the piece of rock that he put this axle on, and I've held it in my hand. They have it in the museum there. It's a very thin, maybe half-inch, 1.5 foot long by 8 or 9 inch, just little piece of rock. And this is what this thing is pivoting on. This is what it's turning on. They're the University of Florida Engineering Department. They ship it off to their colleagues in the geology department, who keep it for about 3 weeks, send it back. They say it is material not of this planet. That's why it was so strong.
So meaning
now,
that
how did Ed know to do all those things? And how did Ed know to go out looking around for rocks in South Florida and know to find one that is what? A meteor? A what? But they said, this is not elements of our planet. This rock did not come from Earth. This is the kind of stuff that just...
Yeah. See that. So you put all those things together. And again, there are many, many more elements in there that are just as amazing as every other one that you're talking about. And you put all these elements together, the guy who works at night, the guy who doesn't talk about how he does it, the guy who does it alone, the guy who now has materials that are, quote, not of this world, the guy who shouldn't have any actual basis for the knowledge that he has, but somehow has it and somehow is doing it and never tells anybody how he's done it. Now you're suddenly starting to introduce extraterrestrial or some type of other intelligence into that process. You know, that's unfortunately where my brain goes. My brain starts to say, okay, there's a lot of shadow here. He's not telling you the truth of what he's doing, how he's doing it. He's not showing you what has been done. It seemed like if right now I learned of a building technique that would make a 5,000-pound rock weightless, I would have patented that idea, and I would have made, millions and millions and millions of dollars on it and changed the way that the construction industry is done. But that didn't happen. He didn't do that.
You could change it. You could change modern warfare. You could change
absolutely
how energy. You could create unlimited energy sources. You could do so much with this.
And he kept it to himself
Yeah.
and never mentioned it. Never said how, never said why.
In 1951, Ed got on a bus, rode to Miami, checked himself into Jackson Memorial Hospital, and died with the secret of how he did all this. So we think. If he gave that secret off to somebody, we don't know who and how he did it yet.
Wow.
Now, the mystery is incredible. The mystery is, what he did is incredible, and the mystery of how he did it and the why he did it, the why he did it's a nice story. He wanted to attract Agnes Scuff to come and be his wife. He wanted her to come to this house that he built that was a Latvian type medieval castle. She never came. Mm-hmm. That's an interesting story. But what, like you said, what the world could do with this knowledge is just incredible. I will add that he built a generator, an electric generator. It powered a very powerful radio that was a broadcast unit as well as a receiving unit. He made the tubes of the radio out of coils of metal he got in the junkyard and wine bottles that he found, old wine bottles, and he coiled them up, and some of them are still there. They're still on the property in the first floor workshop of his living habitat that we talked about a half an hour ago. So he was into radio, he was into energy, electricity. He was potentially into some form of anti-gravity.
What did his generator run on? Was it just running on fuel, like gasoline?
He called it a perpetual motion machine. And some of the elements of that generator, even though they're pictured there's one picture of him cranking this generator, but some of the pieces of that disappeared. So no one is, again, it's a mystery. No one is exactly sure what that generator worked. But you got to remember, this is 1920s and 1930s. Right. Marconi's still alive. Edison's still alive. And he's fooling around in the outback of America at that point, Homestead, Florida, with two of the great breakthrough discoveries of that century. And he's building these things out of a junkyard in Homestead, Florida.
Yeah, that's what I think maybe some people might miss in this conversation is that he's not doing that now. He's not doing that today with an episode of an issue of Popular Mechanics in his hand. He's doing that. That's the equivalent of me right now building a quantum computer. We're at the cusp of that technology right now, and here I am just over here, in my workshop, building the exact same thing out of garbage that I find on the Air Force Base. So I don't want that to be lost on people. That again, this person with no known intellectual background is building things that are literally brand new technology of the time, and somehow a perpetual motion machine. I mean, if you're talking magnetricity, I don't know how that is generated. It seems like to generate some type of magnetic field, you need a great amount of energy or electricity or something like that to generate the field. And I'm just trying to think outside the box. If he's levitating these rocks, if he's somehow reversing Earth's magnetic pull and at least around those rocks, and he's levitating them essentially into place, there has to be a huge power source that allows him to do that to counteract the Earth.
Well, he wrote a couple of papers, like pamphlet papers. Uh-huh. I mean, they weren't academic papers from the sense that a professor in a university would write. And he talks about magnetricity. One of them, he calls it the magnetic current. And in that paper, he described that electricity. Let's call it gravity. Gravity is a form of magnetism. That magnetism and gravity are cousins. And he gets into the equal MC squared discussion without calling it that where Einstein and Tesla are on the outskirts of if you have magnets and you turn them in the opposite direction, they repel, right?
Right.
Well, he is suggesting there, but he's not telling us how he did it. He's suggesting that gravity has the same properties because it's a cousin of magnetism. And if you can reverse the force of gravity in the same way you reverse the force of magnets, you then have these rocks repelling each other, same as the little magnets on your refrigerator would do, and you can lift them and you can move.
But even then,
he never tells us how to do that,
right?
And he's only suggesting that, and you have me giving you a layman's interpretation of what he said, but he never said exactly any of that. He just hints at it. So now he's got an electric, what he called the perpetual motion machine generator, where he's generating electricity and turning it into radio waves. And the number of people who've come to Coral Castle over the years and created all kinds of theories and tried to understand what he was doing, anti-gravity, perhaps, electricity, radio waves, and who knows what else are lifting maybe these rocks. But they can't build a castle. They can't say, here's my theory, here's the application of my theory, and here's my castle. Here's how I did it now. And they show you the film of it. So there was pieces of this that he was doing in the middle of the night.
Right.
Now, I want to intrigue the audience. If you have enough time, I want to give you one more story for sure.
Absolutely. Go ahead. Okay,
so he died very beginning of the 1950s. And in the 1950s and early 60s, people start moving into South Florida. Air conditioning, the interstate, the jet engine, right? It becomes, by the way, Homestead Florida is named Homestead because it's the last Homestead Act piece of the lower 48 where if you go, nobody wanted the land. It was mosquitoes, it was swamp.
Right.
It was so remote. They said if you go and homestead it, the government will give you the land. And that's why there's where the name comes from, Homestead Florida. So people start moving in now, and it's going to change the lay of the land of Homestead and the people, and it turns into greater Miami. And there is local people, one of which is a woman who is a real estate agent, and she deals with a lot of these people who are moving in, and they hear the story of Ed and the castle sitting right there on, as you say, South 60 Highway, Route 1. And they hear the story, the new people, and they go, nah, that couldn't be. That's a local legend. And she gets upset about it, and she tells the other people of Homestead, they get upset about it. And she says to them, one day, we're all going to be gone, and we could stand up for Ed for just so long. And her solution was to put together an affidavit. The affidavit says, I lived in Homestead, Florida. I knew Ed. I talked to Ed. I will notarize my signatures saying that Ed worked alone. He worked at night. Nobody helped him. And this is all true. And then it identifies who the person is. I was the kindergarten teacher. I ran the post office. I sold him vegetables because I had the gas station. And she ends up with 265 of these affidavits. At the time, remember, there were only 800 people who lived there. These people stepped up and said, we knew Ed, and he worked alone. He worked at night. All of this is true. Those affidavits are signed and notarized or in the Dade County Courthouse. When we went to do the book, we got copies of those, and we took the margin where they wrote in the margins, where they wrote above and below their names, the little stories they wrote, the vignettes that they wanted to. We took those, and that's where a lot of the narrative of the book comes from, in addition to the people that we found that were still in nursing homes, were young people, and they still were alive in the Homestead area. But there are 265 affidavits signed on behalf of Ed that this story is not made up. This is not a wives' tale, whatever they call it, urban legend, those kind of stories. The names that they put on stories that aren't really true. This story has those affidavits backing it up.
So in the title of your book, you called the Coral Castle America's Stonehenge. What was your...
The mystery. The mystery is, because I don't have the answer. See, it's still a mystery, but go ahead. Yeah.
Well, that was it. It was just, what was the reasoning for calling it America's Stonehenge?
Well, in the epilogue, I say, at some point, you have Stonehenge because it's such a famous place where people pulled big slabs of rock out of the ground and lifted them, and people still wonder how they did that. At the other end of the wonders of the world, you have the Taj Mahal, where a guy built a monument to his lost love. All right? So you have somewhere in between lies Ed's Coral Castle, and it's so real that you can go visit it. It's so real that there are pictures of Ed. I mean, we found a vault in one of the banks. We heard about it. We went to the bank in downtown Homestead, and one of the bankers said, we have in the vault, we have a drawer of pictures of Ed that nobody had ever seen, and we asked them if we could use it. And they said, yeah, if we give credit to the bank. There are pictures of Ed. There are pictures of these Florida pine tripods that Ed made with these chains from the junkyard or for the hardware store, and these black boxes sitting on top of these pyramids, these tripod pyramids, where he could not have lifted without something else. We think something's in those black boxes that no one's ever seen. No one ever got their hands on that we know of, and they're gone. But there were some elements that Ed added to this, and the answer is the mystery.
Wow.
Stonehenge has been a mystery. It's America's Stonehenge mystery. It is so interestingly unsolved at this moment that it makes it that intriguing.
So my last question then for you tonight is, what is your lasting impression of the Coral Castle itself, and what would you want people to take away from this discussion or from your visit there, and what should they look for when they go?
I'll give you two.
Okay.
They're real simple. You go visit it and make your own decision. I promise you will not be disappointed. You go see Coral Castle, you will not be disappointed.
So
Number two, you go visit Coral Castle, you walk around it, you get our book is the first comprehensive book about it. You can buy it on Amazon, you can download it. You go to my site, I sign them for you, a few away on the show tonight. But go and walk around it. The second point I'm going to make is there's more to this castle than meets the eye. There's more to this castle than meets the eye. You go visit it, you won't be disappointed, and there's more to this castle than meets the eye. There's a story that lies beneath, within, behind this castle that no one knows, and that's why we call it the mystery of America's Stonehenge.
And every one of the obelisks, they're not just decoration. I mean, as far as I can tell, most of them have a purpose, or they do something. So it isn't just like they were adornments and they were just to be pretty and to be looked at. They actually served functions, right?
One of them is from the tomb room of King Moab, Giza pyramid. One of them's the planet. There's the largest, according to Ripley, the largest heart ever carved about anything. The heart, I mean, it's like 5,000 pounds. This heart table. There are all kinds of these things. In our book at the back, we put all those elements and we explain them. But I would tell you, it's much richer just to go visit it.
Yeah. So you said there's a heart, there's a table that was shaped in a heart?
Table. There's a table with a heart, and he left a hole. He carved a hole in the heart, and there's flowers so that he and Agnes could come and eat at that heart table. And Ripley says it is the largest Valentine heart in the world. There is a huge map table of the state of Florida, and he carved Lake Okeechobee in the middle of the heart. There's water in the heart. It's that big.
Wow.
I mean, a heart in the state of Florida. There are elements all through this castle. I mean, these are really heavy, thick carvings that he did. I mean, there's a planet room, and there's the Saturn and Mars, and the rings of Saturn around it. There's crescents that are, and these are upwards of 2 stories high. They weigh tons, and he carved them, lifted them, and just set them there.
Well,
it's magnificent.
Well, I definitely recommend then, obviously everybody go and visit the Coral Castle. I was very intrigued by it myself. I when I first came to Florida, I did kind of the same thing you did. I saw pictures of it. I said, wow, what is that? That seems amazing. And then I heard the story that one man created it and one man did it alone by himself. And then that's when all the bells went off in your brain, because you start to think, how did he do this by himself at night? No help, no conceivable means to produce these things. And to your point, he took it to the grave with him. He's never told anybody. So, thank you, Rusty, for joining us tonight. At least giving me a little bit. I probably could talk to you for another hour. It seems like there's a lot of information in your book, especially that anybody who's still interested in the history of Ed Leedskalnin or the Coral Castle itself can do that research themselves, can take a look at your book and get some of those, at least not necessarily answers, but at least they can have some more interesting stories, interesting tidbits, interesting information from the castle and from his life itself. Anything else that you wanted to? I know that we're in a kind of a time frame now where personal appearances are out the door, but is there anything else that you have going on that you would like to plug briefly?
I started this with the idea of writing a novel that he passed off the secret before he died to the Society of the Cincinnati, which is not very well known, but it was founded by Henry Knox, Major General Henry Knox, with George Washington, who became the first president. Alexander Hamilton was the second president of the Society of the Cincinnati, the oldest military society in North America.
Oh.
The name of the book is Cincinnatus. I will send a copy of that with anybody who wants the Coral Castle book. And so I started it as kind of a modern-day Bond-esque, but better than Bond, more modern Bond, let's say, not better. And so then I worked backwards and wrote the book with Jack Heffernan, Coral Castle. So it is so fascinatingly real. Go visit it. I think you'll agree there's more to this castle than meets the eye.
Absolutely. So thank you once again. And like Rusty said, if you are interested in a copy of the book, Coral Castle, The Mystery of Ed Leedskalnin and His American Stonehenge, Rusty is willing to give some away. So if you're interested in the book, if you want to contact me at the Prove Me Wrong podcast, provemewrongcast@gmail.com, I will forward that information to Rusty and we'll get a book out to you. So, if we can get 10 people that are interested in reading up on this, we'll have a book giveaway. If you just want to find more information about Rusty, again, it's rustymcclurebooks.com or coralcastlebook.com. And again, you can also purchase it on amazon.com as well, but you might as well just contact us here and we can, get you one for free. Thank you once again, Rusty. I really appreciate it. And hopefully we can talk to you again, and I'll reach out to you after I make it to the Coral Castle.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So, once again, that's Rusty McClure. We're talking about the Coral Castle and Ed Leedskalnin. And I'm telling you what, the castle is impressive by itself, but that isn't the story to me. The story to me is there's this man who, by himself, I don't care how big or how small he is. He can be 5 feet, 100 pounds, or he could be 6'5", 235 pounds. You're not lifting a 5,000-pound block of stone by yourself and placing it perfectly geometrically aligned with the North Star. Or there's another one that's basically a sundial that he put up. It's another 30, 40-foot obelisk that is a sundial and operates as a clock, a solar clock. Building this 2-story castle off to the side where the living quarters were, none of those things can be done individually. I firmly believe that. Then you're talking about the whole story about this man was left for dead. He had stage 4 tuberculosis. He was pretty much at death's door. 18 months later, he has fully recovered, and this is before he did anything with the castle itself, before he had quarried rock 1 out of the ground. And then he goes in, he buys 10 acres of land in southern Florida, and he just starts cutting huge rocks out of the land and placing them in his castle. Then decides he wants to move it, has a guy come with a truck. He won't let the guy see how he moves the rocks. They're just suddenly there. I mean, that all stinks to me of, we are the Prove Me Wrong podcast. We work with outside the norm, extraterrestrial type of things. That to me smacks of extraterrestrial influence there, doesn't it? That's always the question we had with the pyramids, is how did they move those 4 or 5, 3-ton stones in perfect alignment, in perfect spacing, in the time frame that they said they did it. They said they did those pyramids in 20 years. You'd have had to place 1 block every 5 minutes perfectly for 20 years. And just the act of, I know you can throw people at the problem, but it's not just the people that you're throwing. It's also the people and the time constraint that you're throwing at it. So, 20,000 slaves, yada, yada, yada. 20,000 slaves in 20,000 years? Yeah, you can get that done. 20,000 slaves in 20 years? That strains credibility. So this also strains credibility to me, that this man by himself, without any type of outside influence, could do it. No level of schooling, no level of demonstrated understanding of physics or electricity or any of these things that he is dabbling with, and building machines, that produce magnetism or electricity. Man, that's all skeptical. Man, that's so interesting. Was this man an alien? Was this man saved by aliens? Was this man cured by aliens and then given a task, and then once the task was over, passed away? I don't know. You'll never know, but he's not telling. And that's the most unnerving thing of the whole story, is that he did all of this and never said, this is exactly how I did it. This is the machine that I built that made these rocks weightless. This is how I moved them. This is the exact amount of current I need for specific rock sizes, because I can't imagine you need the same amount of magnetism for a 5,000-pound rock as you would for a 40,000-pound rock. I'm assuming you have to adjust your level of current or whatever for each individual size. There's a ton of factors that go into moving these things, putting them in place. And he told no one. So that's where my suspect alarm goes off. It just starts going crazy. But I definitely, anybody who's interested in going down and seeing it, take that lens with you when you go and look at it. Don't just look at it and say, wow, these are really interesting little rock formations. These are neat. They were placed up in position here, and it's very aesthetically pleasing, and it's nice. Oh, well, let's go hit the Pizza Hut across the street. Because, unfortunately, there is a Pizza Hut across the street. It's literally right off of US 1. As you drive down the road, it's just in the middle of industry. You know, it's in a commercial area. But don't go down there thinking that. Go down there and think, how did one man, regardless of his size, with a third-grade education, no heavy machinery, no help, how did he construct this? How did he make carve these rock formations out with no mistakes and put them in place perfectly with no mistakes? How was this accomplished? And maybe that'll give you some level of appreciation for the Coral Castle that you didn't have before, that you wouldn't have had before if you didn't know the story. If you just thought, well, we're here, let's take a look. It's interesting to me. I mean, I find that whole thing very suspect. I think that guy had extraterrestrial influence all over him, giving him the information, giving him the knowledge, maybe even just doing it for him. I don't know. Maybe that's why it had to be done at night, because they came out at night and they did the job. I don't know. What are your thoughts? Once again, you can contact me through our Gmail account. It's provemewrongcast@gmail.com. And if you're interested in one of those books, send me an email, provemewrongcast@gmail.com. Say, hey, I'd like to see one of those books. Coral Castle, The Mystery of Ed Leedskalnin and His American Stonehenge. I'll forward that information to Rusty and we'll get you a book. First 10 people. If you just have a comment about it, what are your thoughts? What are your theories? Rusty didn't have any theories as to how this is done. He really just kind of gave, this is an account of what happened and a history of what happened, and then an account of the structures on the castle themselves. He didn't propose any theories as to how it happened. So you can certainly do that. Send those to me on the Gmail, provemewrongcast@gmail.com. Once again, if you want to contact me on Facebook or Instagram, you can just search Prove Me Wrong. It's the name of the program. If you just want to hear more stories like this, more episodes like this on the podcast, you can find us on Stitcher, Spotify, TuneIn, SoundCloud, Apple. Really, anywhere that you find podcasts, you can find the Prove Me Wrong podcast. Like and subscribe to the show, and you will be the first person notified when a new episode releases. We release usually once a week. Hopefully, many more stories just as interesting as this one. I will say before I go that our sponsors today, Javaremix, is the perfect blend of 100% organic Arabica coffee infused with nano-emulsified CBD. You can start your day off on the right foot with a great tasting cup of coffee with all the demonstrated benefits of CBD. Javaremix offers traditional ground coffee as well as single-serve K-cups in both regular and decaf. And if you're not a coffee person, Javaremix also offers teas, bath bombs, and facial scrubs. And as an added benefit for our Prove Me Wrong listeners, if you go online right now, that's javaremix.com, and enter the promo code Prove Me Wrong, one word, you'll get an additional 20% discount off your entire shopping experience. Javaremix also offers free shipping on all orders over $40, so you literally have no reason not to give it a shot. Once again, that's javaremix.com, promo code Prove Me Wrong. The Prove Me Wrong podcast is also brought to you tonight by ZendoZones from JT Eaton. ZendoZones are shaped like fearless bug-repellent tiki gods. Let Surf and Stan, Hawaiian Howie, and Luau Lily bring the islands to your backyard with ZendoZones citronella burners. ZendoZones uses natural 3% citronella candles and incense cones. They're perfect for patios, decks, backyards, campsites, poolside, and much, much more. You can enjoy the outdoors again. So they are available on Amazon.com and at select Ace Hardware stores. So please go ahead and collect them all today. Once again, for Rusty McClure, Mysteries of the Coral Castle, Mr. Ed Leedskalnin, I am Pete Lieb. This is the Prove Me Wrong podcast, and we will talk to you again soon.